I want people to live as well as they can for as long as they can. Simply put, peptides are just amino acid sequences. The negatives around GLP-1 specifically come from this very aggressive overdosing. This is where we're seeing now more of the data and focus going to, wow, we can see reduced risks of breast cancer, better outcomes of survival for ovarian cancer survivors, probably less neuroinflammation. All of these big medical organizations now are saying, I think we need to think about these peptides really from a systems biology perspective. And what's cool about peptides is it goes back to the body's natural wisdom of everything's connected.
So I am here today with Sarah Morgan to have a very intriguing conversation that you will love and benefit from her wisdom and experience. And we're focusing in on bioregulators and peptides and then amino acids. And there's going to be a really good, solid educational piece because of Sarah's experience. And so what I want to do right out of the gate, Sarah, is have you give us a snapshot of who you are, where you came from, how you got here, and then we'll get right into it.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Ian. I come from a family of cardiologists. I was eventually going to go to medical school. That was the plan all along. And I realized I didn't want to do conventional medicine as I worked in the system during my degree. And I really wanted to be part of really what health and wellness I had the vision for, of what it could be in the future. So I pivoted. I got a degree in nutrition. I have a master's degree. And it was all biochemistry. So I'm totally a biochemical geek at heart. I love innovation. I've been in this space for about 20 years now. I've done things from being a clinician. I love genetics, epigenetics. I was the gene queen back in the day. To really finding the things that are innovative, that are solving problems for people's health and wellness. And that's really my mission is I want people to live as well as they can for as long as they can. And I've done a lot of different things. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I love to educate. I wrote a kid's book about the microbiome called Buddies in My Belly. So lots of fun stuff I've done throughout my career.
Yeah, very good. So you've had quite a bit of experience on both sides of the equation, from the learning side, the educational side, the entrepreneurial side, as well as the receiving and testing side from what you consume.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to bioregulators and peptides, I know there's a lot of great information and a lot of misinformation in this category. There's a lot of stuff that I think needs to be regulated and stuff that may be overregulated. And I've been hearing all kinds of trends that, peptides are evil and they're like vaccinations and all this misinformation, because we already know that our body would normally produce peptides and hormones and stem cells and enzymes and whatever. And there are other things, because we're so compromised and we're so hit with all this toxic crap and all the food that's missing stuff, our bodies have fallen out of sequence. And you also mentioned the whole microbiome, which ties deeply into this. So could you take us to square one on where what the peptide world looks like, what a bioregulator is from a layman's term, not too scientific, but just on that level for now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, peptides are super fun and they are natural. That's why I love them. Our body makes about 7,000 of them every single day. And simply put, peptides are just amino acid sequences, and bioregulators, this category kind of sits under peptides. It's just tiny little peptides. They're about 2 to 4 amino acids in length. And because of that, they work a little bit differently in the cell. So let's back up to peptides. Peptides are really like anywhere from 2 to 50 amino acids in length. There's a little bit of argument of how many amino acids, is the definition of a peptide. But the idea with them is I think about them sort of like the letters in our alphabet, those amino acids that we can take and arrange in different ways and create words. And those words can act as messengers. We think about, sending different words or a message in a text message. And I'm going to text Ian and say, hey, Ian, let's meet for lunch here. And that's going to direct you to where you're going to head for lunch. And we're going to talk about all kinds of fun stuff about peptides and bioregulators. So a peptide is really a signaling molecule. It's like sending a text message, and it attaches to the cell receptor. And then inside, the cell does a bunch of really cool stuff that it's designed to do naturally to produce health and wellness. An example of this for a peptide that a lot of people are familiar with, Ian, is the GLP-1s, which have been developed for weight loss. So we have these GLP-1 receptors on a lot of our cells we've discovered all over in our body. and they attach to these receptors like a pancreatic beta cell, and they're going to impact how insulin is secreted. What's really cool is we've realized we have GLP-1 receptors in our brain, in our immune system. So they do all kinds of different powerful things that can produce health and wellness if we use them properly. Now, a bioregulator is just a tiny little peptide. But what's neat about them that we're discovering is they actually go inside of the cell, inside of the nucleus, and they can impact DNA and chromatin in a way that basically to think about it is it's sort of like a light switch with our gene regulation, epigenetics, which is sort of on top of our biochemistry. And they're signaling some of that gene expression, again, in a positive way. And I'd love to tell you why I think that's super important, even as it relates to GLP and weight loss that we've just recently discovered about epigenetics with GLP-1 users.
Right. And GLP-1 has a very, very bad connotation on one side and a very good on the other. And the differentiation is so important because it's where they're derived from and what they do inside the body and the either beneficial or devastating effect, which is kind of crazy, right?
Hmm?
Because why would somebody take one that had all kinds of side effects when you can get some that have no side effects? We'd love to get into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to remember is our body makes GLP-1 agonists, right? These receptor agonists that go in kind of like a text message. It's like, I'm going to go send something to the pancreas. Then I'm going to go send something to the brain. I'm going to send something to the immune system. Our bodies are naturally programmed to do this. That's where we discovered these different peptides that our body was making. We actually discovered them in the bypass, people who got gastric bypass patients. It was like, hey, what is the body making that's being dumped from the stomach into the small intestines? And again, like any molecule, like anything that we have on planet Earth, and I think it comes down to why you're using something, how you're using something. That is a make or break of if it's beneficial or if it's potentially harmful. And I think all of the negatives around GLP-1 specifically come from this very aggressive overdosing, go higher in your dose, go higher in your dose, because the only thing that we're looking at is weight loss when there's so many other things that are happening in the body. And what's interesting too is there's also very much a shame story going beyond just physiology of what's happening in the body too. There's a very interesting piece of how weight, being overweight or obesity is still connected to this. Somehow you should have shame about that, or your emotions, your lifestyle, all of these things are negative. So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle there that I find really interesting, and everyone has an opinion about it.
I actually despise the term weight loss with a passion because it's quite a negative. The body, when it's supported, knows exactly the perfect weight. And weight loss could mean losing bone density, losing good muscle, losing important fluids. The whole fat thing, there's beneficial fats and unhealthy fats. There's toxic overload. So weight, the body's ability to manage itself and knows it, because your body is so dialed into itself if you support it. And we're talking about naturally supporting as best as possible to have that perfect weight, to get the bone density up to where it needs to be, this tensile strength, the functional muscles, not some big blown up, torn muscles that look like a bodybuilder, but true strength, and having the proper hydration, having all of the components in perfect equilibrium. And my body, when that happened with me, my body just dialed itself perfectly in. And what I also noticed, weirdly enough, is that when I got into certain protocols, the weight went up on the scale quite a bit, like 7, 8 pounds. But my body size was exactly the same. It's like, so my waist, okay, how did that work? That's because I was dehydrated. Now I was hydrated. So hitting that and really supporting that natural side. And the weight loss industry, I would say, is 99% scam. And it's, like you said, it's basically on somebody shaming people. You're obese, you're what? Forget those terms. Your body is hyper intelligent, just needs to be supported.
Exactly. And I think getting to your optimal weight, whatever that is, right? And I'm totally in agreement with you, because there's also this obsession in our culture. And it's not only women, it can be men too, about this like weight loss, or I'm overweight. But I think when we think about, what that means, it's your body knows what an optimal weight is. And weight loss, if you're overweight, is just a byproduct of getting healthier, to your point. and your body's going to recalibrate to that right, set point. What's interesting is, and this really was part of my story too, Ian, a lot of it was just really high stress levels. I've been a serial entrepreneur for a while, and there's a lot of, different things you navigate there. But so many people are walking around with inflammation, insulin resistance, even at, I would say, an optimal weight, but they're inflamed and they have dysregulation at a cellular level. And what's interesting is using, again, we don't have to talk about GLPs the whole time, but as a peptide category, using those to increase insulin sensitivity and improve health. This is where we're seeing now more of the data and focus going to, wow, we can see reduced risks of breast cancer, better outcomes of survival for ovarian cancer survivors, probably less neuroinflammation, maybe even preventative measures for Parkinson's, for Alzheimer's disease. We see remission of autoimmunity. All of these big medical organizations now are saying, I think we need to think about these peptides really from a systems biology perspective. That's one of the things that I get so excited about is conventional medicine is so focused on, okay, you're going to go to your cardiologist to look at your heart. Then we're going to go to this doctor to look at all the segmented areas of who we are. And what's cool about peptides is you can't really do that because it goes back to the body's natural wisdom of everything's connected. The hip bone's connected to the leg bone, that's connected to the brain, that's connected to everything else about you. And if we lean into that, even in traditional medicine, it makes me excited because I think we're going to expand our view of what health is and how interconnected the body is.
Right. And even like the whole fascia system, the tongue is connected to the big toe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Connected to all the fascia.
Yeah.
And that interconnectivity we want to have optimized, because what we learned over the years was there were certain elements that the body requires, that any electronic device requires to communicate properly, which is a very specific form of iodine. And if you don't have it, your body begins to lose more and more of that communication over time, which then disconnects the brain from proper communication. And if you don't have your brain fueled properly, and then all the misinformation coming out about the brain can run on fat, the brain can run on ketones. Really? Well, that's interesting. The fuel for the brain is glucose. But then glucose coming from the wrong kind of carb does massive damage to the body, like you talked about with insulin resistance and all the inflammatory response that comes from that. And that's where most of the people live. But you have to have massive amount of glucose going to the brain. So how do you do that? Well, there are very specific ways you do that. And then the peptides are the signaling molecules and the bioregulation of whatever those types of peptides are going to support the body communication as well. So having everything connected, that's such a very important point that if we could dial back 2,000, 5,000 years and get to the food that is not hybridized and genetically modified and sprayed to death and on it goes, right? We would be in a totally different world, but we're not. We're in a world that's very compromised, and we have to compensate for that compromise. So what you're talking about is real, genuine compensation. And then each person individually learning from people like yourself on how to support the body's ability to regulate and stay connected.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up iodine 1. I'm on the iodine that you have, and it's amazing. I've been a proponent of iodine for a long time. I've also had 3 pretty significant TBIs in my life, so I'm always thinking about my brain, and iodine is amazing for brain health, and I feel a difference when I take it, so I love that you bring it up. And the importance, Ian, what you talk about here of when we're using these powerful tools, right, like peptides, bioregulators, because of the state we're in with being more compromised, what I'm seeing that I think is exciting to me is we can never forget the foundations, right? Nothing is a magic bullet. And what's interesting, even in these, research studies now with GLP-1s, we're going back to like, wow, it's really important for people to eat enough protein, for them to exercise and move, not just for muscle mass or bone density, but their lymphatic system, right? They need to sleep to restore their brain, to clean their brain up. They need to have adequate nutrients, right? Micronutrients just for the cells to be healthy enough to function, to do all of the signaling that a peptide, a bioregulator that we're going to use is going to, assist with and kind of guide the body towards.
Right. Yeah. The signaling molecules that you produce are the best ones are the ones you produce. When the body is not producing, it's like, okay, make sure you're going to supply those peptides, which you could do orally with some, like L-carnosine, for example. I take that every day. And that's a big support to having the body then go into that state where it's going to self-generate and bring the quality of life up. And because there's a lot of stimulants. And if we're using stimulants because we have to, that means that we don't have the right energy. If we don't put fuel to the central computer system, I think we grossly underestimate the brain and the head.
Yeah, I do too.
Right? Really. And I spent the last 3 years getting more and more tapped into proteins and fats and reducing all the harmful carbs. Problem is, I was throwing the baby out with the bathwater because there are certain very specific carbs that fuel the brain that do no harm to the body. And all the rest of them are harmful. I don't know how sensitive you are with carbs, but my body is very sensitive. And once I cleaned out all the garbage carbs and got my fasting insulin at 3.3, and that takes a while, then I was able to add in the proper carb that goes through a different pathway. And then my brain relit up 10 times more than it ever was. So, what you're hitting on is very, very important for the combination of things. Because, how much misinformation have you seen in your career that was steering you off track that you had to get back on track because somebody was trying to create a trend or make a bunch of money off of differentiated information?
Nonstop my whole career. It's like, even all the way back to, remember, like, eggs are good, eggs are bad. There's this like back and forth about that. And then we had like, fat is bad. Let's add a bunch of sugar and all of these other chemicals to things. And then we realized, like, well, maybe fats aren't that bad. And actually sugar is a problem, right? There's so many examples of this over time. And I think it comes back to, I love what you bring up about carbohydrates, because I have been such a proponent of carbs. And this is where one of my biggest passions is personalization to an individual, what they're dealing with, where your body is specifically at in the moment where you're saying, I need to make changes. And this is why I got into genetics so much, and I loved it. Not that it's the only factor for someone, because genetics are just, it's more information to have. But there's a carb gene that you can look at, and that has to do with even your ancestors. How many carbs did they eat? How is your body and your metabolism designed? Are you someone who's better at low, moderate, or higher carbohydrates? And then it comes to quality. And one of the things there, Ian, that I think is big is we have to feed the buddies in our belly, our mitochondria, right? We also kind of forget about how important carbs and the good carbs are for our mitochondria. And we can see these shifts when we go on the high fat, low carb, high protein diet that aren't necessarily long-term beneficial to your microbiome, which is also a huge part of regulation for your entire system and all of your biochemistry. So lots of that, when you follow trends, and it can be so confusing in the health space. Anytime something seems really extreme, I always tell people, maybe pause, ask some questions about it, and then also ask, is that right for me? I see that for a lot of women too, as they're going through peri and menopause of, for example, like, yeah, I love explosive movement, sprinting, doing things that are more intense because it helps with mitochondrial density. It's good to push yourself, but you don't need to do it for an hour, right? Where you really tax your endocrine system to a place that kind of just depletes you across the board. You don't need to, abuse your body in perimenopause as your hormones are shifting. It's being more strategic about what you need in that season of life.
Mm-hmm. Right. And just really coming down to common sense stuff where you're like, anything extreme or radical, this is the thing. This is the thing you need. Over the 22 years of research I've done, I met many people along the way who got old and died. And they died of regular health problems. Yet they were high-level knowledge in certain health areas. I mean, really the highest level. And they had done lifetimes of research into whatever it was. Because there's 15 different categories of major health things that are combined in our body. And then they would die. And they would, one died at 58, one died at 68, one died at 72, one died at 80. I was like, why did they just die? That's weird. Because they were into longevity, but they were missing a whole category. And the chain is only as strong as the weakest link, and a link would break, and then they would pass. So it became essential for us as individuals to look at things humbly and realize that we're likely missing some pretty important information in categories that we're not paying attention to yet. And we can't just stay focused on the things that we've learned. We have to be always open to the next level of something that could combine in to support the whole thing. Because it's like not about how long you live. It's about the quality of life right here, right now. And is that quality of life increasing a little bit as we go into the next minute, hour, day, week, month? Because we're always in the now. People say, you need to live in the now. Are you kidding? You're always in the now. And if you're distracted with what's behind you or what's ahead of you, then you're missing the point because you're in the now, whether you like it or not. So where are you now? Where am I now? Where are you, the listener, right now? And are you truly getting a little bit healthier in each category of health that you have personally researched? So people like Sarah and myself and the people who we interview are all here to bring important pieces of the puzzle. Each one is so important, and we just keep fitting pieces together. So that's what, your work, your lifetime of work, you're at a very high level when it comes to the understanding of how these things work within the system. And as you mentioned earlier, the bioregulators and the peptides play a major role in so many functions in the body. It's not to be taken lightly, and it's not a trend. It's not a fad. There's going to be a ton of misinformation in this category, and we just want to get right down to the truth of it.
Yep. I love it. And I think health too, just for listeners, I know you talk about this all the time, but I just love for people to remember it is a journey. It's not linear. You might be doing really well in one area of your health, and then you realize, gosh, this is another area that it's kind of struggling. And that's okay. Welcome to being a human, right? I think sometimes we see in that misinformation or these trends, these people who try to represent themselves as, I have everything perfectly figured out. And the reality is nobody does, because
That's
we're all
right.
humans, and it's okay to share the journey and be honest about, like, I think I might need to figure this out a little bit more or lean into this because there's still something here, not in a way even that's physical, right? Sometimes that's mental, emotional. There's a spiritual aspect to our health and well-being. There's communal aspects. I think one of the biggest things I see now, Ian, too, is there's so much obsession about physical health, and we forget about that we're social beings and isolation is not good for us. And just being with friends and having fun is such a big piece of our well-being. And I'm like, we forget to play, right? That happened to me. Part of my story over the last several years is I was a startup CEO, and I was grinding so hard and I almost lost myself in the process. It was also during the pandemic, and I got super depressed, and I was just like, what's the point of all of this? And I realized, looking at my life, I had a lot of things that were going well, but I forgot to play. And at the end of the day, that's a huge part of me and what gives me life. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to start playing a new sport as an adult. And I joined a Bad Moms soccer team a few years ago. And it has been one of the coolest things that has helped me stay well and stay calibrated in terms of my overall health, maybe more than anything else I've done over the last several years. I will say peptides too. I've really become a fan of them in terms of using them personally. But it's very comprehensive. And the big thing I would say as people are listening to is don't get so obsessed with just one area like you're calling out.
Right. Yeah, and the whole having fun thing is living your life. You're here to have fun, to be on the adventure, to experience going hiking, doing sports, doing something physical, hanging out with people, interacting with in a social environment is life. Like otherwise we're an island and we're like, you got depressed. Everybody would get depressed if they were separated or isolated or just grinding every single day. So I'm really happy to hear you got into the soccer. That's a nice way to go and meet new people. And everyone, the other thing is every single human being we meet is of such great importance because we hardly get to meet anyone in this lifetime, if you think about it. And even the people we meet, how many people become a major role player in your life? The vast majority, 99% of them, are playing a bit part in your life, in your drama, and you're playing a bit part in theirs. And then the people who you're playing a major role with and they're playing a major role with you is like a handful. How many people do you hang around with every single day in, day out throughout your life? It's a very small number because you only have so much bandwidth. So each person we meet is a very interesting and very important thing, regardless of where they're at. They could be a completely homeless person or a multi-trillionaire. They all hold a role of some importance. And I think if we realize that, then we give time and we stop and listen and we pay attention to people who are coming into our space. So I love the fact that you pointed that out, because I think that the society we're in is trying to head us into a direction of separation and isolation.
Absolutely. I think in the world of AI, to be human and to connect with humans is the big disruptor, and the way that you stay grounded as we try to push ourselves into a completely opposite direction. That scares me.
Right. And I love the fact that you mentioned AI as well. So I think they've named it perfectly: artificial intelligence. That means it's not real. It's definitely artificial. So I like HI, which is human intelligence, which is far superior to any artificial intelligence. And then you have actual intelligence. So I've run into a thing called high-centric actual intelligence, which has the human being at the very top of that, using the support of patterns. And really, that's all it is pattern recognition. But it can't hallucinate and it can't be censored. So just think about your own life, Sarah. I mean, if you have people coming in your space who have patterns that are harmful, how long do they get to hang out with you? Right. And they will usually delete themselves. So I'm not out to just purge and send people packing. I just create an atmosphere, an environment, a terrain where they realize that they don't fit in. And then they dismiss themselves over time. You know, if I came out to hang out with you and we were doing business and we were, spending time at events and learning about each other, if I have a pattern of gathering information on you and then use that against you, everything you say can and will be used against you, right? That's the pattern that I kind of manifest. Eventually, in a pretty short period of time, you're going to find out, wow, okay, that's messed up. So then there's a distancing, there's an immune system that kicks in that says, hey, that pattern is recognized and that pattern is not welcome. And I think the same thing applies within our bodies, that we see pattern recognition. If we eat certain foods, we don't feel well. Okay, so they got to go. And if we're not sensitive to it, if our brain intelligence and our gut intelligence, our intuition is not there, and then you won't be able to discern. How much is your discernment increased in your life just in the last 10 years alone when it comes to relationships and business, right? How much, like 10x?
I would maybe say 50 to 100x over the last 10 years and I think it's such an interesting thing you bring up too, because the more you allow yourself and you practice that of listening and being intuitive and having wisdom, whether that's in your physical body, mental, your relationships, it's you dial that in more and more as a skill. And I think it guides you towards better health. So it's a huge asset. And I think so many of us we're not body aware. We're not taught that. And I think as we go towards artificial intelligence versus human intelligence, there's going to be more of that war of how do you lean into human intelligence for yourself, for those of you in your circle, in the midst of a world that's pushing towards a pattern of artificial intelligence. And I don't know, I'll just say too, like I have these moments even with artificial intelligence where I'm like, oh, that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
My human intelligence, well, it's like the tingly, like, that's not correct.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's your intuition, your experience. I was at a event back in 2015 at a thing called Mastermind Talks. And this gentleman who was interviewing Tim Ferriss was up on the stage. And Tim, Tim, of course. So he was asked the question, how do you determine what to invest in? Because at that time, his portfolio was around like 274 million, somewhere around there. And of course, at that stage of the game, he's not a billionaire, but people would obviously be approaching him to invest because he had money to invest. And he said, that's the perfect question, because he said, this is what I learned. I have a team who do all the due diligence. No deal ever gets to me to look at to invest in if it's not going to be extremely valuable. So I already know, walking to the boardroom to sit down with the people, I already know that it's a really, really good investment. So he said, what I look at is the microbiome. So he didn't use this term, but this is what I'm using. It's the microbiome of the people in the room, because they are going to be a social, environmental microbiome of their energy, their coherence. Where's their mental state, emotional state? Are they greedy? Are they fearful? What are they? They might have the most valuable investment you can make, 10x on your money in a year. He said that is already established. He said, then I just look at the people. I just get into a conversation for a couple hours. I just get to know them. And I decide, would I introduce them to my mom and dad, my grandparents? Would I go on vacation with them? Would I like to hang out with these people for the next 10 years? If not, there's no possible way I'm investing, because I know that I'm going to be sitting there talking to these people for at least 10 years while this is developing before it exits. He said, that's the criteria. And I think if we have that approach in life, then we're going to be with people who are resonant. And the resonation is frequency. It's that we're emanating a language, body language, tone of the words, facial expression, what we talk about, what we know, what level are we at. You don't want somebody coming around with asking a million questions all day that are unlearned. So there's a cultural thing that kind of self-develops. And we end up meeting each other at a certain particular time. And then there's this gelling, a formation of a culture of people who are resonant with beneficial things.
That is so well said, Ian. I'm resonating so much with that in terms of my journey, because I've learned some of those lessons the hard way. And I think all of us have, even if you relate it to your health, going to that intelligence piece and that microbiome of gelling of your own body, of the people that you do, the things that you do, right? Like, this feels really good for my body to do this kind of exercise or activity, or eat this way, or use these different peptides, or supplement this way. And I think there's such a stream of intelligence that is thread through all of these different aspects of our life that can benefit us.
Right. Yeah. And then that taps back into your work in signaling. So if we have the right signaling, then our cellular intelligence combines together for our organ intelligence ending up here. And when we fuel this one up here at a high level, now it can monitor everything. You know, there's protocols out there which have astounded me. People who take massive amounts of the right kind of glucose to feed the brain, if they're type 1 diabetic, within 6 months, they're not type 1 diabetic anymore. Well, what on earth is that? Are you kidding? And if you're type 2 diabetic, in a couple of months, they're not type 2 diabetic. It's not the cure for it. It's just that the brain lost its communication somehow with that particular organ, the pancreas, and the pancreas goes dormant, and you're considered type 1. Now you're insulin dependent. How could a person get off insulin dependence in 6 months after a lifetime of type 1 diabetes by flooding the body with a specific kind of glucose? So these are paradoxes. These are things that are like the opposite of what we believe to be true. And how's that possible? So I think the scientific side and your research and because you really took a scientific approach. And of course you have to discern who you're talking to and what you're listening to. There's always that learning curve. We're always learning more every single day. And if we are thinking we've arrived, then I'm going to have something that's going to come and humble me and knock me down and say, hey, buddy, don't think more of yourself than you should. You have to have a correction now. Right. And so I love the corrections. I love to be proven wrong if I'm incorrect. And that's, I think, if we all take that attitude, that all of us could be open to be proven wrong. I don't claim to know everything, that's for sure. In fact, the more you've learned, the more you realize you didn't know. The more I've learned, the more I realize I didn't know, the more there is to know. And so it's a big adventure. And I think, your work is going to support a lot of people, and also just your attitude towards the learning curve and having a movement go on now, do you have a community of any kind right now where people are relying on some of this teaching that you have?
Yeah, I am in process. I actually just built a peptide education course, and this is really designed right now for healthcare professionals, because I had so many people just ask me, like, Sarah, will you build a peptide education course? I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so much work. But I realized I'm going to get up super early before my workday, and it was a side project that I did that was super fun to push myself. And so I have that. With that, I'm going to build a community on that aspect. I'm also going to build a consumer peptide education course that's just a little bit shorter. It's a little bit more simple, but it's giving some of those foundations. And then from there, I love teaching, Ian. So I think I'm going to build out some more courses and create more of a community that way. I'm going to do more social media content. I've decided to do that. So more is coming, and I'm really excited about that.
Right. So ever since you've had this little shift lately with your career, when you wake up every day, what's the main consumer of your time at this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really education is something that I'm really leaning into in terms of content. I think people are wanting to understand more of these foundational aspects about their health, all the way to higher level, like teaching me more details about peptides and bioregulators, and really strategically thinking about where do I want to invest the most amount of my time for the biggest impact to improve human health. So a lot of it right now is actually strategic thinking that I'm doing, in addition to some of those education and content resources.
Right. Yeah, cool. Now, how much does the bioregulators and peptides tie into the autonomic nervous system?
I think we fully know, to be totally honest. I think they do. I think the extent is probably pretty significant. But I don't, in terms of the mechanisms of that, I don't think we fully understand. But again, going into the GLPs, right? There's a GLP-1, there's a dual agonist, triple agonist. There's actually a bunch of other substances that are being studied and created in that space as well. And what's really interesting is we're seeing how they modulate the nervous system. Some can actually upregulate that fight or flight, like heart rate gets higher. Some of them are impacting the nervous system in a positive way that lowers negative things that happen, right? I'll just say I'm staying super general on purpose, but I think they probably play a massive role depending on which peptides we're talking about and which signaling we're trying to do or they're responsible for.
Right. Yeah, because if you're flight or fight, which you're in, if you're getting stuff done during the day, you don't want to get stuck in there. And I think a lot of people do get stuck, or they have a very startling activation of the sympathetic, which can be very stressful, and throw them off and throw the hormones off. And so the bioregulators, the cell signaling, it has to tie in to keeping the body in equilibrium between the two systems. So you don't get, like, if somebody behind you at a dinner is serving plates of food on a big tray and they drop it and it crashes, do you freak out and turn around, right? Or do you stay totally calm as if it never happened? Don't even turn around and look and pretend it didn't even happen, because that's the proper response. And then you could eventually have a look and see, hopefully they got it cleaned up. But that kind of flight or fight edginess, I think, really needs to be brought into control. Whereas if you have someone who is under heavy stress, because we all go through stressful situations at different times, we should become more calm in a high stress situation than ever, because it's not going to serve us well to be freaking out and having a fit and throwing a temper tantrum or yelling or screaming. And if you take like a 5-star general in the military, if they freak out even a little bit, they are immediately demoted. Whereas people at lower levels can freak out as much as they want, swear, scream, yell, have a temper tantrum, and they don't get fired because they're at a different level. So I think if we're like 5-star generals with our health and our bodies, and we graduate to that level of maturity, we're going to be in a much better space. And we're self-regulating as well. So I think there's no coincidence that there's bioregulators, that's the term,
Yeah.
in the peptides. We want to be peppy.
Yep.
We want to
Want to
have,
be peppy and yeah, in balance, I think is such a great thing. Like an example of that, I just had somebody who sent me a text message the other day, and cell-lank is a peptide that helps with more GABA signaling in the brain. So I think in modern world, a lot of us are tipped towards that fight or flight, like the dinner plate drops behind us and we have the startle reflex and it's like survival mode all the time, right? And we're scrolling on our screens and everything is go, go, go like a race car and we're gonna, veer off and crash and burn kind of deal. Cell-lank is the brake to our brain, and it adds more GABA signaling. And I had someone who's like, I am a more anxious, kind of revved up, lots of, the adrenaline, that side of their nervous system being overactivated. And they're like, I have felt so calm, but also more focused and clear mentally than I have in years. And I think that's a really neat thing of we want our lifestyle, we want our mindset, we want our sleep, we want all these things to be aligned to regulate. But what I like is if somebody's so off balance, peptides, right? I'm a huge fan of nutrients and hormones as well, right? But something like cell-lank as a peptide can help someone very powerfully say, whoa, this is what it feels like to shift into regulation. And maybe it's not the only piece of the puzzle, right? Same thing with when women get enough progesterone. to calm their brains down, where they're not like driving in traffic, like, oh, we're going to rear end somebody. And they're really, everything annoys them, right? Their brains are just kind of on edge about everything because they're lower progesterone and they need more progesterone for their brain. Same thing with nutrients, right? We can go into the aspect of things like theanine and magnesium and how they're beneficial for that aspect of the calm, cool, collected. And it's all of these pieces. So is meditation. So is getting out in nature, discharging your stress in positive ways. So it's all of these tools that we can utilize. And that's what's exciting is they're not isolated and separate, but we need to use them together and personalize it for people based off of where they're starting.
Right. And they don't dispel all the foundational things we always do, which is deeper sleep, getting grounded, being in nature, hugging a tree.
Yeah.
Treehugger.com became one of the biggest websites in the world.
I love it.
Right. It's like,
It's
what?
also why people have animals, right? Like hug your dog is like an amazing way to regulate your nervous system. So there's lots of tools that we have that are really powerful. And for me, it's just neat because I think peptides are another one. And I love things that are natural, that are innately wise. And, going back to the start of the interview when you're like, yeah, there's a lot of people who are shaming peptides, right? People are like, oh, that's like a GLP-1 and there's so much shame in that. I'm like, you don't understand what peptides are if you're starting with that point of judgment. They're actually very wise. They're natural. We need to use them responsibly. And that goes also into what we're seeing in the space with peptides about regulation, responsible use, how, we have these different dosing formats, whether, there's injectables that kind of have been the, gold standard to date. But what's cool is we're seeing all these technologies evolve with new delivery formats too. And bioregulators, because they're so tiny, a lot of those we can just do orally, which is really exciting.
Right. Yeah. And they're all measurable. I was playing around with we have a molecule that we make a product out of called magnesium chloride hexahydrate. And it's an extract from ocean water, but it has all 6 water molecules attached to it. Well, it's coming at 0.35 of 1 nanometer. So I thought, oh, interesting. I wonder what L-carnosine is. Let's check that one out. Because I noticed that when we combine them, they go right into the body through the skin. And it's around 0.3 of 1 nanometer. So we know that the pores, the hair follicles, they're going to absorb this stuff. So transdermal, sublingual, oral, wow, it's another world opening up that is so much nicer than having to inject.
Yeah. And I think that's the future. Injection will always have its places. There's certain molecules I think that are going to be hard to do with the other technologies. I'm a huge fan of all, peptides, all delivery formats, but I think it also makes it a little bit more accessible to people who are like, I don't know about this. I've never done an injection. There's a lot of people who have, needle phobia. And the more we can advance with these other delivery formats that are, a little bit more welcoming to someone who's brand new to try, but they're effective at the same point, is where we really have a magic unlock to use these tools for health and well-being.
Right. Yeah, it's a matter of just always looking or being open to, not just looking for, but open to that which is going to be easier and still very effective without taking a shortcut and missing out on something that you could otherwise get. And you never know what support your body is going to need at that particular time. So the measurement of the body in order to manage. So what have you discovered on the measurement side? So hey, I need this, and this in the bioregulator peptide world versus you don't need it. And if you give your body something it doesn't need, it might not be so happy.
That is such a great question. I don't think there's any system for that yet. I think that's where the space is going to go in terms of really understanding how we personalize things in a way that we do the right intake, Ian, of where are you at? What is your body needing? What tools do we want to use, again, synergistically? It's not just peptides or just bioregulators, but we create the right program and then we measure that properly in terms of the outcomes. So I think that's where we're going. I have a lot of thoughts in terms of specific cases of what you can do, but I think labs are good, right? I think listening to your body and someone who's a skilled practitioner who knows how to ask the right questions about symptoms and where someone has been in terms of their health history, pairing that with different measurables, biomarkers that we can do, using some of these different substances and then doing follow-ups with symptoms, with biomarkers. I think another area that I'm super interested in that we're finally commercializing epigenetic expression and how we can measure that with labs is I think we're going to start to see bioregulators being studied and how they move gene expression and epigenetics. Now, one that we know technically is a peptide, but it's just a tripeptide, GHKCU. That peptide modulates 4,000 different genes. So it's really, under that category of a bioregulator in terms of epigenetics. And there is a couple of different labs that have technology to measure that. And this goes actually into what we recently discovered about GLP-1 users. Why do they regain weight? Because that's what we see in these trials that they've done where they're following people who have gone on their peptides, they've lost the weight, they go off the peptides, and a lot of them, the majority of them, gain at least 25% of their weight. Some of them go all the way back to where their weight was beforehand, and they gain it really rapidly. And the question is, why? Well, what we've realized and studied, this is really recent research that was released, is our body and our cells have a memory of obesity. And it's not, again, going back to this, it's not a shame story. It's that if we look at transcriptional factors in the cell, in a fat cell, that cell maintains the phenotype, we'll call it, of a fat cell that wants to be fat again and make the body fat, even when you lose the weight and you're lean. It carries that. And we think, this is on mouse models, the translation of that is 5 to 10 years for those epigenetic factors to reprogram and basically heal, is what I think about it. So the body has a memory. They also found that the same happens with immune cells, because a big thing with GLP-1 users is my autoimmunity went into remission. I feel so much better. I have less inflammation because it's actually changing the inflammasome, right? What's happening in terms of all those inflammatory signals? Well, when they look at immune cells in these GLP-1 users, they're still programmed towards inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
So the big thing that I think we're going to see that I'm excited about is how do we use things like bioregulators, even I think nutrients, right? It goes into how we use our lifestyle to regulate epigenetics to bring our cells back to a healthy place, because the GLPs, they're helping modulate on the surface, but it's not getting all the way down to the details. And maybe it would over, again, 5 to 10 years is what we're looking at. But now this is a big area of pharmaceutical drug discovery of, how do we regulate epigenetically these factors so someone who uses a GLP-1, they can go off and their cells go into a healthier state where they can maintain their weight loss.
Right. And it goes into lifestyle. It goes into getting the body back into equilibrium. So let me ask this question. What kind of reaction will your brain and your gut have if I say the word Ozempic?
Ozempic, to me, I want to dance. I don't have any negative response to it other than I think what I'm sad about is that the shame and the misunderstanding and the abuse of a substance that actually, when used in high doses can harm people. I think that makes me sad because I think it's being misunderstood and misused. And then there's a whole side of pharmaceutical profits from us as taxpayers of the research that was done at NIH, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Right. Yeah. So it's because it got quite the name out there, from Ozempic face to whatever, the things that, and then the snake venom and all of the stuff.
Yeah, I put that in my course too of can we set the record straight about this? It helped them discover what the molecule is doing, because these lizards, right, the Gila monsters, they don't eat for a long period of time. And it's well, how are they surviving and being able to do that? And they found these similar molecules that were regulating hunger cues for them. It's not, it's not the same molecule, but it helped us in our understanding and our research. So yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there about it. I think, again, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of people who want quick fixes. And then the reality is they regain their weight. They have less muscle mass. They haven't learned anything about healthy lifestyles at a foundational place. So over time, after a few years, they could be in a worse place than they were initially. But I think this next era with peptide use, Ian, is we're going to see responsible use of peptides. And there's a really big push for that. Even the conference, Eli Lilly just talked about their results from retatrutide of their clinical trials. There was a lot of people commenting about the big thing that they did was with diet, with exercise, these compounds can be used for X, Y, and Z. Because I think everybody's really focused on like, it's not a magic bullet, right? Peptides aren't. They have to be utilized alongside other things. And that's how we really see good things happen that are long-term changes.
Right. Yeah, and really going into more of a natural approach,
Mhm.
a lifestyle approach.
Yep.
Why is the brain causing the body to crave this, that, or whatever? And if you're just depriving the body of something, then there's a rebound reflex and they're going to go gain the weight again.
Yeah. And this
And
goes
it's like a
back
roller
to,
coaster.
if I could say, because I'm really passionate about kids' health,
Yes.
your kids and what they eat and the habits they have are massively important because you're literally programming their epigenetics for the rest of their life. And we know that when a kid gains weight, they actually have more fat cells than an adult who gains weight. So it's actually harder for them to lose weight because they have more mass of these fat cells. And then now we're discovering with the GLP-1s, once you have the cellular memory of obesity, it's really hard to get rid of that cellular memory.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
prevention, again, doing the right things from the get-go is so critical. So if you're listening to this and you have kids, please think about them. Think about their health long-term because it can be truly a fork in the road in terms of what you're programming into them, not only with their habits, but actually their cell memory.
Right. Yeah. You have to reprogram at some point. If you've allowed that to happen with your children, they need to reprogram. So there is hope by giving the brain the glucose nutrients it needs for the brain to go, okay, you don't have to crave anything. Everything's going to change. And they might even gain a bit of weight to start with, but they'll lose it later. But they'll go into balance. So I think not looking at the scale anymore, looking at the body size. What kind of condition is the body in? What's the size of your frame? I'm a small frame. You measure between these two bones on the elbow. So as a male, I'm very small. And you get guys who are very stocky. So I'm 5'11" almost. And so they would think 220 would be perfect for one guy. 180 is good for another one. I'm at 160 as my perfect weight. So you can't judge, other than you're just looking at yourself and where are you at, measuring, letting your body find its equilibrium. And yeah, I think, wow, the children today are being hammered so hard because isolation, number one, caught up with all the digital media, like programmed like crazy level and getting addicted to all these very, very unhealthy foods. And so they're coming from a totally different place than I was from being born in 1958. I never had any obesity stuff show up until I was in my 30s. And then my body blew up on me and lost like 90 pounds when I found out what the truth was. But I didn't have any GLPs. I had nothing other than wisdom given to me that I was able to instruct my body from, very fortunately. My body dumped 90 pounds in 6 months and never gained it back. So I just came back up to a regular weight. I was actually down at 130 at one point. And then I just slowly went back to 160 without trying to gain weight or do anything. It just happened. So it's a totally doable thing. So getting educated, right now, where are the best places to find you?
Yeah, so my social is sarahmorgan.co, Sarah with an H, and that's my website as well, sarahmorgan.co. And then I have my aminoacademy.com is my peptide education course. If you're interested in looking at that, I also just have a free module. I believe in test it out. There's a BPC 157 module where you can kind of see what the course is designed like and what we go through. And it's just really designed to give people the foundations they need to be ready for the future of the peptide and bioregulator boom.
Yeah, right. And it's coming for sure. So I think people becoming more aware and accepting the fact that they need to be educated with this is so important. And your lifetime work really is culminating in this. So I really appreciate all the work you've done and are doing. And I think you're just getting started now because you've done a lot of the heavy lifting, gone through all the different trials to come to the place where you are now, and can be a very powerful resource for people to tap into and have confidence that what you're going to share with them, you have vetted because you've been on the ground doing this for such a length of time. So thank you for the share today. And it was very valuable. I think everybody will attest to that who is listening. And we will definitely get updates and we'll catch up to you again. This is not the only interview because you're always going to have updates as we go. So I do appreciate you coming, Sarah, and being on this.
Well, thank you, Anne. It was a delight to be here. Appreciate it.
Beautiful. All right. We'll catch up to everyone soon.